Welcome, dearest watcher, to Eastern Manga Reader. Today's story takes place in a women's world, similar to the Middle Ages, a world full of miracles and magic. One such miracle is our Isekai'd virgin man, the main character, Faust von Polidoro, someone who retained memories of his past life on a normal modern-day Earth, and that was reincarnated to his current world ruled by women. In this world, it is women who fight both for nations and their people. And, unsurprising given this world's chastity-reversed values, the victor's spoils include men. Furthermore, there is only one man for every 10 women, and as a result, men are relegated to a private role and take no part in public life. Those with power collect and plunder as many men as they can, whilst those without will share whatever few men are left with their sisters and neighbours. The value of a man's body, in a sexual sense, vastly outweighs that of a woman's, so their jealousy guarded by their keepers, highly coveted by all and often sold for large sums of money. To Faust, a tall and muscular manly man in his early 20s, such a world is cruel and terrible. Specifically because a man like him, who still gets aroused by beautiful women, is considered a complete deviant. Now, with all that said, this story truly begins within a luxurious throne room with a well-dressed yet nervous Faust looking down whilst tensedly kneeling before a 32-year-old Liesenlotte, the voluptuously sexy and scantily clad queen of this country, elegantly sitting on her throne. It's already been 2 years since Faust took over his fiefdom, and no matter how many times this happens, he could never get used to an audience with Her Majesty, the unnecessarily arousing queen. It just makes him so damn nervous, but not for the reason one might usually think, so all he could for now was quietly sigh and glance at the primary cause of his predicament, which was the lovely petite girl in her early teens standing next to him known as Valière, this country's second princess, and the one who Faust became an advisor to. Speaking of the princess, she noticed him sigh this time, and uncertainly asked him if had any thoughts regarding her soon-to-be first battle, the reason they're both currently in the throne room for. However, Faust is trying his best to not think of anything right now, given the increasingly uncomfortable stiffness in his groins caused by the practically naked queen. Moreover, he knows the moment he has to raise his head and say anything, that's when the trial will begin. Unfortunately, though, the queen asks him if he has an opinion to share. So, begrudgingly, he stands up, despite not having any opinions to share. After all, he's only here to carry on the will of his mother, and by extension, the hopes of countless ancestors who ruled his land before him. And so, his back straight as an arrow, he gets a clear view of the enchanting MILF queen through narrows eyes and immediately groans quietly through gritted teeth that his dick hurts. Cool, calm, dignified, and a competent ruler with 2 daughters. Liesenlotte would be a model monarch if only she didn't dress so damn provocatively, thought Faust. However, Faust does his damnedest to pull himself together, knowing that if he makes the slightest mistake in an audience with the queen, that there'd be no way he'd get out unscathed. Faust? Valerie questions, not having heard what he murmured, and so does the queen, asking him if there's something he has an issue with. Yeah, his issue is your outrageous outfit, he thought, but doesn't dare say out loud, so he stays silent, which prompts the queen, with arms now crossed below her magnificent breasts, to assure him that he's free to speak his mind, so he reluctantly preps himself while thinking about his current predicament and its uncomfortable solution. See, in the new strange world Faust resides in, you'd be seen as an unbelievable pervert if you get an erection from seeing a naked woman. If they found out that he was already at full mast just from the sight of the queen, then he'd be ridiculed as a nymphomaniac, and his parents, his ancestors, and the people of his land will become an absolute laughingstock. And so, for the sake of preserving the honor of everyone, he's wearing a metal chastity belt right now, because, quite frankly, seeing the still dignified queen adjust her position and shamelessly spread her legs open seemingly in an act dominance, was just too much for Faust, someone who was still a virgin back in his old world. However, he also wants to get this over with before he loses his rapidly dwindling sanity, so through gritted teeth and hands, he forces himself to straightforwardly look at the erotically posed queen and questions her as to why Her Highness the Second Princess only has command of her royal guards and his troops, to which the queen simply says again that there's no need to use overwhelming force against mere bandits. Faust, seeing her breasts shake with just the slightest movement she makes, groans and further tightens his fists to the point they start bleeding as his face starts turning red, to which Valerie notices and is shocked. But when she hears him yet again question the queen as to why her first battle is against bandits, she assumes he's angry on her behalf and is moved by the act, prompting her to gaze fondly at him. However, the truth regarding his bleeding hands and flushed face were that Faust's dick was in intense pain from grinding against the metal chastity belt. Something that worsens again when the queen shifts her position and sensually puts one leg over the other, causing Faust to inwardly curse her as a goddamn pervert for swaying everything in full view. He has to think fast, after all. He can't afford to sully the name of his mother here, but his situation is just too damn much. At the rate he was going, the battle between his dick and chastity belt is eventually going to cause either one of them to break. When suddenly, eureka, he gets an idea when Valerie gets a little closer to him. That's right, he'll just hide behind the second princess. Wasting no time, he gets in position something that surprises her as she flusteredly looks around confused whilst feeling his large calloused hands on her waist and shoulder. Faust, however, unaware of her thought process, just hid behind her while looking down and practically roared at the queen, asking how she could make her youngest daughter into a laughingstock by sending her to deal with bandits as her first ever battle, when Anastasia, the first princess, had her first battle fending off an invasion from Willendorf. He stresses at how much dishonor that'd bring the second princess, as he gradually lowers his voice with eyes closed, asking the queen to please reconsider for the sake of Valerie. This passionate act, from her point of view, immensely moves the flushed princess, who trembling muttered that she was used to getting the short end of the stick. "Enough," the queen declared loudly, and says that fighting bandits is also a noble duty, and orders Faust to raise his head and look at her. However, he stood his ground behind Valerie and firmly refused the queen, knowing that he'd lose his remaining sanity should he dare to look at her tantalizing assets once more. The queen, momentarily silent, rises from her throne and stands up straight, then strongly orders Faust, referred to as Lord Polidoro, to heed her words. And so, hearing the seriousness coating the queen's, he reluctantly stopped using Valier as a recovery shield and nervously looked up at the queen, instantly getting a clear view of her barely hidden crotch. An act that finally shattered his remaining sanity as he froze for a moment. The queen, unaware of what she's caused, continued to defend her viewpoint that defeating Bandit Scourge is also a worthy service, and questioned him if exterminating bandits was completely beneath him. Faust, his sanity now lost to overflowing lust as he sports a nosebleed and bites his lips hard enough to bleed, abruptly stands up and strongly denies her claim while thinking that he's had enough and was going to plough the queen real good. The queen, the second princess, and the royal guards now defending the queen with weapons drawn, were all stunned and intimated by his boiling red face, reminiscent of a wrathful demon, and by the incredible vigor rolling of his chiseled body. Quickly, the nervous and lightly sweating queen gulps and orders him to calm down, explaining to the Knight of Wrath Faust that she does greatly value his abilities. For example, she mentions the time he rode out to assist her daughter, the first Princess Anastasia, and the way he and the soldiers of his fief tipped the tide of war against Willendorf. Moreover, after single-handedly slaying 10 barbarian knights, he also fought against their commander and personally took her head. So, it was not her intention to make light of the hero of the Great War, not even remotely. She shall never forget the service he rendered unto the country, and she understands how strongly Faust feels for Valerie, but she needs him to calm down and listen to her. Something he managed whilst still having a nosebleed, despite his stoic expression. Continuing, the Queen makes her royal decree clear in that she will not change her mind regarding the nature of Valerie's first battle. Faust, having stopped his bleeding nose and just wanting to leave at this point before anything else happens, knew that there was nothing more to say as Valiere's advisor and asked Her Majesty if he could please be excused, to which the Queen calmly permitted after a brief pause. Relived, he says he'll take his leave while internally glad he and his dick managed to get through today intact, both survival-wise and chastity-wise. Valiere, softly uttering his name, tells him how glad she is that he became her advisor. Hearing that, Faust looks at her with gentle eyes and agreed, specifically about the fact that she didn't inherit her mother's fat tit. Truly, he was glad. Anyway, setting that aside, thanks to Valerie's advisor speaking up so defiantly on her behalf, she was granted permission to withdraw as much from the national budget as she saw fit for her expedition. Additionally, although that seemed to be all that was on her mind then and there, the truth is that Queen Liesenlotte's thoughts after having laid eyes on Polidoro were somewhere else entirely. Recalling back to when Faust was kneeling before, she knew she made a mistake. Initially, when he was appointed as Valerie's advisor sometime before the Great War, Faust von Polidoro didn't appear to have any thoughts regarding the matter. But the fire in his eyes! It didn't matter whether or not it was an act. To think he'd dare stand against her, the Queen, for the sake of Valerie's honour. She could only be amazed, moreover, seeing as he's a hero of the Great War himself. He must have felt like it was an insult being sent to fight against bandits. She also recognized that dealing with a high-caliber male knight like Faust, with a long list of achievements, is proving to be no easy task. Faust, the Knight of Wrath, who is spurred to rage by his emotions, is definitely not someone she could afford to take lightly, by any means. Truly, she didn't mean to belittle him. Those are her true and honest feelings. However, the fact of the matter is that Valerie's first battle had to be against bandits, since her plan is to ensure a smooth succession to the throne for Princess Anastasia. It'd be both dangerous and wasteful to use the throne's strength to build up the power base of Princess Valiere now. That was the reason she issued the royal decree. But when she saw Faust's face, which was so passionately enraged, calm down before he left and give Valerie a warm and gentle smile, just like her late husband used to do, she had shockingly realized that all his anger up until then had merely been an act, and that she should have given Faust von Polidoro to Anastasia. Furthermore, seeing Faust treat a powerless princess like Valiere as a friend and equal, without any calculation or cunning, the Queen found herself longing for something like that. She can't resist being attracted to the heart of such a man like that, a man who loves and is loved by all, just like her husband was. And it seems like taste in men is something that is passed down from mother to daughter, evident by Anastasia's growing obsession with Faust after seeing his bravery in the Great War, and so Polidoro being by Valiere's side isn't good for anyone. To be specific, the Queen was worried Anastasia may interfere with Valiere, which may put her life in danger, because, should a struggle break out between the two of them, the mismatched patchwork of Valiere's supporters wouldn't stand a chance against Anastasia's legion of veterans. Let's not even mention that Anastasia's advisor is Duchess Astarte, the third in line for the throne, who fought alongside Faust in the war. Valerie. She's a good and kind girl, but those two have always shunned her. Hence, should the worst happen, Liesenlotte doubts they'd show her youngest any mercy. Moreover, constantly being in the shadow of the genius Anastasia and Astarte, it was a terrified Valiere who sought out her own advisor. Alas, the Queen had no choice but to pull them apart before their bond could deepen any further. And in order to soothe Anastasia's jealousy, if even a little bit, she has no choice but to say, that should Valerie fail to defeat the bandits, which the Queen secretly believes to be impossible, given Valerie had Faust the Wrath Knight to help her, she will have Lord Polidoro dismissed as her advisor and be placed under the command of Anastasia instead. This declaration immediately shook the now pale Valerie to her core. She can't understand why she's being subjected to such a thing. After all, she's always just been her older sister's spare, and now even her advisor was going to be taken away. Teary-eyed, she tightly grips the hem of her short skirt in frustration whilst lamenting her mediocrity, and that she should have seen this coming, but she was the one who found him first. She recalled it clearly. It was 2 years ago. Inside a cheap inn, a 12-year-old Valliere smugly crossed her arms and abruptly declared to a man eating his food that he would be her advisor. Of course, that man was none other than a 19-year-old Polidoro. Quite confused, he was suddenly being arbitrarily assigned as an advisor by the second princess. Unsurprisingly, his lackluster attitude rubbed a royal like Valliere the wrong way, so she chastised him. Then again, Polidoro had no idea what she was initially talking, and besides, what would he even gain by becoming her advisor? That prompts Valliere to seriously give it some thought, and eventually lead with helping him gain an audience with her mother the Queen, something he's been trying to do for a while. Intrigued, Polidoro humorously admits that'd be mighty helpful. Continuing, Valliere also says she's got lots of money to spare should he require some. That too interests Polidoro, admitting that it's not a bad deal sweetener, but he urges her to go on with a teasing smile, which Valerie does so through gritted teeth, truly trying to think of something, eventually saying that he'd be allowed to choose his preferred station, and she tries continuing, but struggles to come up with anything else. So Polidoro stops teasing her and asks her why she, the second princess, called out to him. Since, as a guy, he considered himself big and ugly, so he doubted he wanted her for any sexual reasons. Her expression blank, she suddenly asked him how many heads he's taken so far, to which he shrugs and admits he hadn't kept count after his 100th head. Those admission of his words causes Valliere to brightly smile and enthusiastically say that he'd be the strongest by far should he participate in the sword tournament. That remark briefly stuns Polidoro, who then wryly smiles and says that she'd have to make do with that scenario being an IF, since men aren't allowed to join. Valliere, sporting a cheeky smile, presents her hand to Polidoro, whilst asking him to get along with her since they're two people who can never be number one. Grinning, Polidoro agrees to be her advisor and thanks her, simultaneously swearing his fealty by accepting her outstretched hand and kissing it. Then, as Valliere leaves the inn satisfied, she gazes at the hand her new advisor kissed and firmly promised herself that she'd never give him up, even if she had nothing else. Chapter 2. Faust, at the royal palace's flower garden, could be seen squatting whilst in deep thought. If he had to be honest, almost nothing good has come out of him becoming an advisor to the second princess. Initially, he was supposed to be allowed to go back to his land and guard its borders, but he ended up getting dragged into a huge invasion war not long after. Let's not even mention the pain in the arse and uselessly erotic audiences with the Queen he had to endure. Moreover, he's now been assigned as a babysitter to the second princess for her first battle against bandits. He couldn't help but groan and lament once again his decision to become an advisor. Suddenly, two feminine boys in maid outfits sitting under a gazebo noticed Faust and started insulting him because of his physique. They condescendingly questioned Faust as to whether he was trying to show off he was a man by looking at the flowers, even joking that the poor roses would wilt in fear from his gaze. Glancing at them sideways, Faust murmured that he couldn't care less about the flowers, all white, recalling that those guys are the kind of men prized in his current world. Particularly in his country, delicate and petite boys are what's considered attractive. A big guy like him is considered an ugly eyesore. Annoyed but holding himself back from lashing out, he just can't make sense of his country's absurd royal palace. One moment you're practically being shown a striptease by the Queen, and in the next you're being shit-talked to your face. Honestly, Faust just wants to hurry up and find a suitable wife so he could go back home to the Polidoro domain already. Abruptly, one of the maid boys, sporting a mean look in his eyes, called him an abandoned orphan from Willendorf that was picked up and trash-talked his mother. Faust's mother, the last ruler of the Polidoro domain, was a strange person. Faust's father died not long after he was born, and it seemed like his mother's relatives were constantly telling her to remarry and give birth to a girl who could be the heir. However, his mother always rejected them, something that led him to assume his mother must have loved his father very much. So even though he was a boy, she would instruct him in governance, territory management, swordplay, and strategy, the kind of things a girl would be taught. And since Faust had memories of his past life, he considered it normal education required for an heir and never questioned it. He accepted it all and did his best in an attempt to adjust to his new world and his new mother, a woman of few words. He often ended up studying into the long night. Moreover, the battle training was especially harsh. Also, whilst he knew that this world's gender ratios were skewed, it wasn't until later that he learned that the idea of a male knight was practically unheard of. For example, when he was 15 years old and on his first expedition, he asked the head squire Helga about it, and she could barely look him in the eyes. Later on, as his mother's body began to weaken, she knew herself that she didn't have long to live, but she constantly forced herself up from bed just to teach a man like him how to survive in this kind of world. Then it happened when Faust was 20. His mother's condition suddenly worsened. As if she realized she had nothing left to teach him, she passed away at the young age of 35, and it was only after she was gone that he fully understood who she was, a strange woman who refused to remarry, and instead raised her son as both a knight and her successor. She was a mother that loved him unconditionally, and even whittled away her own life, working to make sure he could go on living his. That's why he didn't care if those twinks called his body, that his mother loved with all her might, ugly or repulsive. But insulting his mother, or the people of the Polidoro territory that his mother protected and held dear, was crossing his bottom line, and he sure as hell wasn't having any of it. So Faust stands before them menacingly, rooting them in place with the savage bloodlust emanating from him as he seized the nearest twink by his collar and ominously started shoving his meaty finger up the twink's small nose, to which the deathly pale twink tried to stop to no avail, all while labelling him a barbarian and threatening him. The other aghast twink managed to find his balls and tried to use the first princess advisor, Duchess Astarte, as a shield. Faust, however, couldn't care less about that, and coldly declared to the other twink maid that he was next. Faust also advised him against running away with eyes full of killing intent, and so, continuing, Faust tightens his grip on the crying and pleading twink in hand, and mercilessly shoves his thick index up the guy's quickly bleeding nose, all the way to the base. This immediately elicits a blood-curdling screech from the spasming twink, which causes Faust to wickedly smile. Unfortunately, it's cut short by the arrival of a bootylicious curvy woman loudly demanding aggressively to know what was going on. Furthermore, she coldly watched Faust take his bloody finger from the nose-bleeding twink, spewing frothy red blood from his mouth as he collapsed with hollow, teary eyes. Faust, unperturbed, coolly acknowledged Duchess Astarte and asked she was doing. Obviously, her mood couldn't be worse, evident by the scowl she's donning. She was having the two twink maids work for her in the royal palace, hence she'd like an explanation from Lord Polidoro. Yes, this lady is Georgine von Astarte, and although she's an advisor to the first princess, she's herself is considered third in line to the throne. Additionally, she's a high-ranking member of the extended royal family and is greatly trusted by the commoners of her domain and the nobles of the court. Taking this as a chance, the unharmed twink maid scrambles to Astarte, begging her to help them while slandering Faust. However, Astarte doesn't blindly believe the twink now hiding behind her and asks Polidoro for his side of the story. Faust, ignoring the twink calling him a barbarian, calmly explains that the twink maids had said that his mother picked him up from the enemy country, Willendorf. Her expression severe, Astarte ominously questions the now shivering twink whether what Faust said was true. Unsurprisingly, the twink maid, caked in cold sweat, shakily tries to deny it, but Astarte sees right through him and grits her teeth, demanding him to speak clearly. Now frantic, the twink hastily kneels and justifies himself by saying it was due to Lord Polidoro being part of the second princess's faction, and that they were just trying to pay back Lady Astarte's favour. But suddenly, bam, he's cut off with a vicious rising right kick from below his chin, which launches him backwards as she furiously chastises the damn fools. The foolish twink maid, appeared to be unaware that the downright demonic Duchess Astarte had no room for mercy against anyone, whether the one in her way is a man or a woman. Astarte, the goddess of war. Astarte, the lady of massacre, whose gory exploits on the battlefield are inspiration for bards across the country. Like Faust, she's a veteran of the war against Willendorf, and she's also a voluptuous super beauty with incredibly large tits. Anyway, after stomping the shit out of the lying twink maid, Astarte turns to face Faust and solemnly apologizes to him, asking him to please take her brutal beating of the twink as her apology. Now smiling, Polidoro reassures her that there was no way he could be upset with someone he fought side by side with, not to mention her status outranks his. Genuinely relieved, Astarte easily blows off his mention of rank and gingerly reminds him that they're war buddies as they both leave behind the twitching twinks. In the fires of battle, friendship that transcends status and politics are often forged. So, even if there's bad blood between the first princess faction and the second princess faction, Duchess Astarte and Faust were an exception to the rule, and they even get along quite well in general. In other words, the second princess faction is so weak in comparison to the first that such a feud isn't even worth caring about. Speaking of Astarte, she's got a warrior's spirit and an easygoing personality, and Faust really likes. However, that's excluding a few minor caveats. For example, now looking at Faust hungrily, Astarte bites her lip and boldly mentions how hot Faust's ass is looking. Taking it further, she abruptly gropes his ass tightly, shocking him and, again, making himself question as to why an exceptionally talented woman like her has made a habit out of sexually harassing him. Still fondling Faust's buttocks, Astarte notes and questions him as to whether his ass has gotten even thicker since they last met. Flustered, Faust stiffly tries reprimanding her, but she continues and tells him not to worry as she's reflected on her past mistakes as a lady. She follows up by saying that she'll refrain from groping him in public or when around anyone else, like before, questioning that, otherwise, it'd be sexual harassment. Faust, however, believes differently and thinks that it doesn't matter how many people are around. It didn't excuse her from feeling up his ass whenever she felt like. Besides, speaking out loud, Faust tells her that he has the arse of a man, meaning that it's probably just hard and flat. Getting heated, a flushed Astarte proudly declares herself to be an arsewoman. Therefore, she's qualified to say that Faust's ass has the perfect shape and feel to it. She especially enjoys its softness, not letting up. Her breathing starts getting ragged from lust as she again fondles his arse, albeit more sensually tissue time, and asks him why not just become hers since they've already shed blood and sweat on the battlefield. Faust, nose bleeding and flustered, counters with the statement that he's saving himself for his future wife. Not missing a beat, Astarte smoothly states that then she'll make him her husband, solving the issue as far as she's aware. And to be honest, Polidoro momentarily gives it a serious thought, but then quips that he isn't too keen on having his territory absorbed into hers through the Thea future children. She doesn't give up and tells him to be her lover. Then she'll let a kid they have be the heir to his territory. This causes Faust to humorously laugh in good faith, saying that her idea sounds like that'd make them more than lovers. That said, he truly thinks that her proposition isn't bad at all. He doesn't want to marry into her family and see the Polidoro domain get absorbed into the vast Astarte lands. But if he was just her lover, he'd still be able to rule his lands and raise a kid as his heir. Though, if that happens, he'd likely come under heavy criticism for having a child outside of marriage. Coming out of his thoughts, Faust notices Astarte stop in front of him with a confident smirk, saying that she's yet to meet a woman that can match her stamina, and knowledge the downside being that she's a virgin. Hearing this, Faust smiles brightly and says that means she's the same as him, while internally thinking that it didn't seem like a big deal for her. Unable to stand it anymore, Astarte firmly grabs Polidoro's shoulders and states that she wants him to be her first, even going so far as to pay him if he'd just let her plough him already. Faust, on the other hand, while outwardly silent, thinks that he himself would be happy to pay for the same thing, and so struggles to come up with an excuse to refuse her. But then he has a realization, and when really thinking about it, he quiet fancies her. Moreover, he's always been a tit man, so when glancing at Astarte glorious milkers, he's surprised at how he managed to restrain himself till now. So, having no reasons to refuse, he gives in and silently promises to his mother to have his child pays their respects to her grave. Sadly for them, as they're about to kiss, they're interrupted by the furious first Princess Anastasia angrily asking Astarte what she thinks she's doing. Yes, the well-endowed curvy woman that just appeared out of nowhere while showing off her smooth side is Princess Anastasia, the first in line to the throne. And in the war against Willendorf, she led an army with her advisor, Duchess Astarte, along with a supporting contingent led by Polidoro to repel the barbarians. Furthermore, she's a genius of strategy, who overturned the odds to defeat 1,000 women with only 500 of her own. Such a woman aggressively questions Astarte as to what her and Faust were taking about. On the other, Astarte wasn't even intimidated at all, and playfully affirmed that Faust and her were merely sorting out the particulars of him becoming her lover. Bullshit! Anastasia wasn't having any of it. Astarte, however, apologies and quips that it's a private matter between her and Faust. Moreover, to her it appeared Polidoro wasn't all that against her prior actions. This greatly shocked Anastasia, who tearfully turns to Faust and strongly announced that he can't. Meanwhile, the person in question awkwardly looked away. Continuing, Anastasia states that the royal family will never allow Astarte's family to become intertwined with Lord Polidoro, since he's from a different faction. Unperturbed, Astarte says that's just for appearances, and that who would really care, since the second princess's faction might as well not exist. Anastasia's flabbergasted that Astarte said that in front Faust, and added that she wasn't for someone like him. Keeping up the momentum, Anastasia faces Faust and commands him to quickly reject Astarte. Polidoro awkwardly looks away whilst half-heartedly acknowledging her demand. Good grief. Anastasia sighed, and though she thought it was rude to turn away from her like that, she smiled and asked Lord Polidoro if he had given any thought to what she said before, telling him to resign as Valier's advisor and to go work for her. Quiet for a second or two, he refuses. Astarte, looking entertained, glances at Anastasia, who asks him why he refused, despite knowing there'd be no future if he stays with the second princess. Faust admits Anastasia will definitely be the next queen, without a doubt. But even so, he'd prefer to keep being Princess Valier's advisors. Anastasia seriously asks why, to which Faust bashfully mentions having to follow his heart. This response caused her to smile, knowing that he was quite the free man. Internally, Anastasia acknowledged that he was just that kind of man which brought up memories regarding her father. Her father never treated her as the first princess, but simply as his daughter, Anastasia. Also, the way Faust supports the people of his land and treats the troops under his command as equal showed that he had a heart similar to her father's. Add to that, when they were on that bloody battlefield, Faust even honestly told her that he was kinda scared of her, sharing his vulnerabilities with her while sporting a troubled smile. To Anastasia, Faust is big, strong, and warm like a great sun. As she was thinking silently, Faust nervously assumed his reason for rejecting her wasn't good enough for a first princess, but contrary to his belief, Anastasia thought it was a perfect from her first love, and so, with a snort, she tells him to continue being Valier's for now while walking away, and to later tell her how the expedition against the bandits went once he returned. Anastasia and Astarte, out of view of Faust, continue their talk, with Astarte telling the first princess to give up on Faust and let her have him. Ignoring that, Anastasia simply says she'll force Faust to be her husband once she becomes queen. Astarte shoots that down, saying Lord Polidoro would never submit like that. More so, since if he became Anastasia's husband, his precious fief will be absorbed into the crown lands of the royal family. And, if Anastasia does end up taking away the place he holds dear, there was no chance he'd have a place in his heart for her. Annoyed, Anastasia looks at Astarte with gritted teeth and asks if she wants her to give up, loudly asking again if that's what she's insinuating. Astarte smugly denies that, saying that Faust is a man bound to his ancestral land and would do anything to protect it, ecstatically proclaiming that they should share him between themselves, and that all they had to do was make sure that one of the children will inherit the Polidoro lands. This flusters Anastasia, who questions if Astarte's lost her mind, because sharing a man between two noble women is absurd. Astarte merely scoffs and returns the same question, asking whether or not she wanted to screw Faust. Flabbergasted by her audacity, Anastasia shyly says she doesn't want to sully Faust. Liar, Astarte knows damn well Anastasia wants to push Faust down and have her way with him. Or maybe she had a cuckold fetish. Beat red. Anastasia groans and mumbles that she doesn't want to bother Faust with any of this right before Valier's first campaign. But, in the end, she relents to Astarte's idea to make him their lover. This pleases Astarte, who says they'll wait until the second princess wraps up her little battle, after which they'll spread their legs open like one of the male prostitutes and promise Faust that they'll protect his territory if he eats them out. Inside the royal palace, specifically Valier's office, the little princess herself can be seen opening a letter, and immediately her good mood was ruined by its contents. So she tells Faust, who's standing by, that they'll have their meeting later. As for the contents of the letter, it was from her personal guards requesting brothel entry fees for 15 people. Shifting the scene, someone can be seen approaching a huge fancy mansion. This someone is a petite woman that's here for business today, so she can't let herself be intimidated before she's even inside the mansion. And so, reaching the mansion's front entrance, the petite woman named Ingrid is greeted and told by a serious beauty that Faust is waiting for her inside. Walking through the huge mansion, Ingrid is surprised Faust would be bestowed the aforementioned building in the Queen's name. However, Ingrid also understood that this much was as expected from Lord Polidoro, someone who's a celebrity in the songs of bards. As for her, she's the exclusive purveyor to Faust, an up-and-coming big-shot aristocrat. Moreover, her merchant guild has been working with the Polidoros since his mother's generation, and thankfully, that was all it took to get in his good graces. Now then, Faust welcomes Ingrid and comments that he's glad she doesn't appear to have changed at all. As for Ingrid, even if her guild is barely middle of the road at best, if she can stay on his good side, then the sky's the limit for the Ingrid Trading Company. Prior to today, she had already pulled all sorts of strings to fulfill his requests, from enhancing his magic-infused great sword to mending chainmail that can fit over his hulking body. Faust, looking troubled, felt bad about suddenly calling her, but needs her to keep quiet about what he's going to ask, meaning it can't leave this room. Ingrid reassures him with a smile, confident she'll make his request happen no matter what. Getting close to her, Faust whispers in her quickly reddening ear that when he gets an erection, his dick grinds right up against the chastity belt, and it hurts like hell. Ah, this again? Ingrid questions to herself, then mentions to Lord Polidoro that his metal chastity belt is custom-made to fit his size, and isn't something that can be so easily adjusted. In that case, Faust passionately asks if this means he's going to have to live with the fact his dick's going to be exposed to the world one day. Or maybe instead that belt is just going to snap his cock in half eventually. Unsurprisingly, he doesn't want to live with either of those outcomes. Flushed, Ingrid puts that matter aside for a moment and asks Lord Polidoro why he gets so many erections in the first place, to which he stoically tells her not to overthink it since that's just how some men are. To Ingrid that certainly sounded troublesome, but Polidoro finds it even more troublesome having to talk to a girl about it. Anyways, he was wondering if it was possible for him to get a new chastity belt, maybe something bigger. Then again, that might make it look a bit obvious. Furthermore, he'd likely get found out when he dressed up as a noble. Frankly, it'd be easier if he was a pretty boy that might get jumped at any moment, since then he can say the chastity belt's for his own protection. However, he doesn't have a wife who'd want to guard his fidelity or any woman who'd try to push him down, so it'd be an empty excuse. Hearing that, Ingrid mentioned that she heard Astarte was pursuing him pretty aggressively, but Faust just considered that as her joking, and besides, even if she's serious, he didn't think he could seriously be her lover. Ingrid curiously asked why that was so. Well, he just can't get behind Astarte, knowing she'd eventually having to marry someone suitable to her position as a duchess. That's why Faust is going to look for his own wife, the only problem being him thinking he's not popular in the slightest. Ingrid, on the other hand, internally believed that Lord Polidoro had it all wrong. After all, he's the warrior who saved the country, and there can be no complaints about his lineage from a long-standing family of knights. So there's no chance Ingrid believes he was as unpopular as he thinks. She's certain that parties must be sabotaging him on the romantic front. What's more, her merchant senses are screaming that Duchess Astarte is far more serious than Polidoro realizes. Because if it means getting her hands on Lord Polidoro, Astarte would for sure be more than happy to never take a legal husband. But the thing bothering Ingrid the most is the huge, luxurious mansion they're in. Ingrid sincerely doubts that there was any way the second princess could organize such a thing for Polidoro. So either the first princess influenced the queen, or it was a personal gift from Her Majesty the Queen herself. Ingrid wonders if they're protective of Lord Polidoro, or simply want to keep him like a caged bird. Still, if it somehow gets out that Ingrid corrected his misconception, she has no idea what those two would do to her. But above all, she's terrified of drawing Astarte's ire, that demon. She could feel her blood run, just recalling the atrocities Astarte committed in the war against Willendorf, mentioned by the sagas of bards. Yes, even though Ingrid could tell Faust the truth right now, and maybe even get a once-in-a-lifetime shot at becoming a merchant to the paramour of the current or future queen. She'd rather go bankrupt than risk getting on Duchess Astarte's bad side. Suddenly, Faust snaps Ingrid from her thoughts, asking if she's listening to him. Awkward, Ingrid internally chastises herself for her bad habit of getting lost in her thoughts. Right now, all she's got to do is get on his good side without getting greedy or grasping for the stars. And so, she blurted out that maybe Polidoro should just stop hiding his spontaneous erections. Unsurprisingly, Faust questions her sanity, and even his squire captain is stupefied by Ingrid's suggestion. Seeing this, Ingrid could only awkwardly smile. Anyway, after Ingrid left, Faust's annoyed he has to keep wearing the chastity belt as long as he's unmarried. Marriage. Faust groans and complains to Helga, his competent squire captain, as to how long he has to wait until it happens to him. Hearing this, Helga asks him what happened to Princess Valliere, introducing him to some suitresses. Prompting her to take a seat, he mentions that apparently it was impossible to matchmake for him. Helga saw how it was and questioned if the capital's nobles have any eye for men. Continuing, she asks Lord Polidoro if it wasn't better he go back home and find a wife from his lands, 'cause frankly she's already fed up with all the capital's nonsense. Grinning, Faust quips that she's a lot more upfront than she used to be. Blushing a bit, Helga fakes a cough and suggests finding a wife among Princess Valliere's personal guards. After all, they're second or third daughters of nobles, and even if they have non-hereditary titles, it should still count. So, she confidently advises him to pick someone from that group. Right. Faust gives it some thought and considers bringing it up to Princess Valliere when meeting her for the strategy meeting, but then recalled something, and if he remembers it correctly, the guards of the second princess are completely devoid of either loyalty to the royal family or pride as blue bloods. This alone shocks Helga. But Faust continues, saying that all they care about is sating their own lust and that they can't solve any problems that doesn't require dumb brute force. He remembered Valliere told him they were little more than chimpanzees without a shred of common sense. Helga, in disbelief such people among nobles could exist, asks if they're really that bad. That's when the scene changes to Princess Valerie sitting in her office, astounded as she demands an explanation for the letter in her hand. She asks Zabine, the cavaciously well-endowed woman kneeling in front of her desk, why she received a letter from her requesting funds to go to a brothel. Zabine, the captain of the second princess royal guards, despite being a blue blood herself, is a dangerous person who staunchly holds an outlook others might call sociopathic. She's a believer in the power of violence and the sorts of methods that would churn the stomachs of other nobles. Yes, she's a knight who's also known as the chief chimpanzees. This chimpanzee recently held a group interview with her fellow royal guards, all 15 of them, and found out that every one of them are virgins. Valliere, clearly confused, could only question what about it, to which Sabine mentions that Princess Valliere's first battle will soon be taking place, and since she and her fellow guards don't want to die being virgins, she was hoping Princess Valliere could provide them with the brothel fee from the annual budget. Rejected. Valliere didn't even hesitate in her decision. This somehow surprises Sabine, but Valliere merely states that the royal treasury isn't her personal piggy bank. Moreover, she definitely doesn't want to have to make the detailed report required of such an act. Additionally, she questions if Sabine really thought she could just and submit a request asking for brothel money. Now crying, Sabine asks what was the point of even being born. This troubles Valliere as Sabine tearfully continues, saying they, the guards, are going to die without getting to have sex with someone or even getting a glimpse of a dick, and that they'll never have a child either. Hearing that, Valliere shyly admits that she too is a virgin and tries encouraging Zabine regarding surviving their first battle together. However, this goes over the chief chimpanzee's head, as she brightly suggests the second princess goes to the brothel with them. Flabbergasted, Valliere calls her a dumbass for even saying such a thing and tells her to spend her own money if she's so desperate. A little embarrassed, Zabine admits she and the other guards are the lowest of the low among nobility, which means even her wage as a captain is basically garbage. Frustrated, Valliere already knows these chimpanzees of hers barely have a penny between themselves. But even so, they're meant to be knights, right? Do they mean to tell her that between the 15 of them, they can't even make something happen with a single commoner man? Zabine's absurdity knows no bounds, saying that even if they may be poor, they're still blue-blooded knights, and that sleeping with a commoner is outrageous. Stunned, Valliere asks why prostitutes are an exception to them. Zabine says they don't count since what they're doing is a job. Hearing the chief chimpanzee's justification, Valliere is in utter disbelief at their reasoning, questioning herself as to why they suddenly find some pride in themselves when it comes to that matter. Their audacity proves to be too much for Valliere as she starts crying, tearfully saying that they should all die in the first battle. Zabine's surprised at her sudden callousness. However, Valliere can't help but seriously wonder if the moron standing before her ever received legitimate knight's training. After all, how can someone meant to be a knight be so utterly stupid? That's when she recalls Faust's squire captain and how competent she is. So comparing that useful woman and the imbecilic chimpanzees assigned to her by her mother more than 4 years ago, Valliere can't help but get knots in her stomach again. Add to that, even though her big sister's royal guards are all the second or third daughters of knight families like her own, they're all elites and not idiots that'd get caught peeping on servant boys. Suddenly it really hit Valliere that she truly was just a spare. She was sure that her mother see the royal guards of the second princess as a convenient dumping grounds for monkeys. And worst of all, if she fails her first battle, even Faust will be taken away from her. Ah, Valliere cries out loud, She really can't keep dealing with these damn chimps anymore. Hearing this spooks Sabine, who bursts into snotty tears as she frantically scrambles to hug Valiere's thigh in desperation, begging her not to throw them away since they've already been out of their homes. Sabine desperately cries that they've nowhere else to go. Those words triggered something in Valiere that caused her tears to stop flowing. That's right, she remembers. They were all cast aside by their mothers too, just like her. So her decision made, she firmly states she won't abandon them. That said, as Valiere dries Sabine's tears with her handkerchief, she reiterates that they're just fighting against bandits, so there's no need for Sabine to be so fatalistic out their first battle. Even so, Sabine weakly mutters that there's no guarantee that they'll all make it out unscathed. Valiere reassures her, telling Sabine to believe the truth I'm what she's about to tell her. That being, the certain story of a male knight's famous one-on-one duel during the Great War against Willendorf, a tale about the advisor to the second princess, Faust von Polidoro, the knight who rules over the Polidoro lands, a man both courageous and wise. Getting excited, Valiere now eagerly begins reciting the story for real. Faust raised his sword, one that would make even a woman groan under its weight, aloft with unmatched strength. Spurring his horse on, he raced through that burning inferno of a battlefield. However, his soul burned even hotter. Still, cleaving a bloody swathe through the masses that stood against him, he charged towards 50 knights with only 20 at his back. Sweeping aside the arrows that rained down upon him, he stood face to face with the enemy commander, Rechenbel, Willendorf's strongest knight, a legend in her own right. After announcing their names to each other, the fateful duel began. Looking towards Sabine, who's wiping her remaining tears away, Valiere realized she was getting to heated and calm down. So basically, to summarize, Valiere merely wanted to say that they're going to have the country's strongest knight helping them on their first battle. So if Sabine has time to be worrying about dying, she should use that time to polish her sword skills instead. However, in response to Valiere's passionate pep talk, all Sabine took from it was that Lord Polidoro's an option she hadn't considered. And if that was the case, she can just ask him to help them get rid of their virginities. This suggestion astounded Valiere, but Sabine appears to not notice her agitation and plans to ask Lord Polidoro for help in the upcoming strategy meeting. However, Valiere still can't believe the words coming from Sabine and nervously questions if she was serious. That's also when she notices a sound coming from outside and looks to see Faust approaching her residence and waving at her with a smile when he noticed her looking at him from the window. While this was happening, Sabine mentioned that with Faust being such a huge man, it must mean that his is huge as well, right? Hearing all that, Valiere is frightened by Sabine's intentions and anxiously begs her to say that she was just joking. Unfortunately, however, the drooling Sabine was raring to go and assault Faust. She even had the audacity to ask Valiere to join her and the 15 other guards, positive that Faust's manly cock could handle one more girl. And this was the last thing Sabine would says for a while, as Valiere couldn't handle the thought of Faust having with her guards and smashed a flower vase on Sabine's head, knocking her out cold. After which, some time passes, and Princess Valiere nervously welcomes Faust and his assistant with the news that Sabine unfortunately couldn't make it to the meeting due to an injury. Sitting across from Valiere, Faust does his best to ignore Sabine's unconscious body laying under the couch he's on and asks Valiere if Sabine will be ready for the first battle while noting the cracked vase. Valiere assured Faust that she'd make sure Sabine was ready for the battle. This spooks Valiere, who shakily mentions that she'll make sure Sabine's straightened out before she introduces her, confusing Faust as to what she meant. All 15 of Valiere's guards gathered for a meeting in a bar. One suggested they needed something to lift their spirits, wherever they sat. A lady directed them to a table in the corner. Seated there, one remarked on having a girl send off before their first battle. Another encouraged them not to hold back, as it might be their last drink together. Some began showing off their money, with one mentioning she had an acorn on her, Pooling their money for meals, Zabine announced she had bad news, but Valliere had rejected it. Someone questioned if they were going to battle without addressing the issue. Another wondered what the palace finances team was thinking. A third disagreed, asking if that was really the case. They all agreed they wouldn't use the princess's budget for a brothel visit. Another lady remarked that it was no wonder the princess constantly called them chimpanzees, expressing a bit of shame as the second in command. A fifth person asked why she was acting so high and mighty for a vice-captain, considering she was just like them. In response, the lady stated that all the others were like her as well. Another person asked why she was acting like a big shot, even though she was the same as everyone else. That girl had the drink and said that weren't they all meant to be in the same condition? And then they all knew she was looking forward to everything and acting all cool wouldn't make her popular with the boys. Just as they all cheered, they discovered one was crying. Zabine told them all to calm down and that it wasn't Hannah's fault that all of them were in such a situation. She apologized that she couldn't pull through with the brother, but she came up with an even better idea, which was Polly. They all became confused. Hannah asked about Polly. Zabine replied that did she really need to explain that to her, and Polly was the country's strongest knight, and he hadn't done that as well. Shota commented that Polly was nothing but 6.5 feet of muscle, and Polly wasn't her type. One mentioned that she liked her boys with cute, soft hands, and Key said she had never touched a boy's hand. Then others gave their opinions as well. Zabine mentioned that all of them were the lowest ranked among the knights, with the titles they couldn't pass in. Typically, they liked it. Then they would never be considered wife material for a noble son. However, if they could maybe distinguish themselves in their first battle and stand out as good warriors, and only one of them could become Polly's wife. From that moment forward, all of them were mortal enemies vying for the same prize. One asked Zabine why she was starting the fight. Another one said that for the sake of her husband, they must fight. The third one said that she would be the one to win. Hannah asked them to stop and questioned what would happen if they harmed each other. Zabine suggested there was another way. Hannah asked her to get down from the table before others followed her, but Zabine persisted and said that they should all simply go to Polly and beg. Everyone commented that Zabine had lost her mind and denied her suggestion. Zabine suggested that they could all lose in one fell swoop. Hannah thought that if they did, even the ridiculously pure-hearted Valliere would absolutely have him killed. And what Zabine said before wasn't total nonsense. If she could stand out in their first battle, maybe she could turn her life around. As long as she was again that, her technique couldn't be beaten. All of them were thinking of becoming his husband. Hannah said that it was just a unit of idiots. The scene shifts to the palace where Valliere, while walking, thinks that she only began to realize that around the time her father died. She thinks that her other sisters really hated her, and maybe for the same reason Astarte did, and that she couldn't stand how mediocre Valliere was. She then knocks on the door, and upon entering Anastasia's room, Valliere wonders why she was called there. Anastasia said that she wanted to give some advice to Valliere before her first battle, and emphasized that there was no certainty on the battlefield. Valliere wondered if Anastasia was being nice to her. Anastasia continued, stating that the information Valliere knew before she went out could be completely overturned only a few hours later. She might think her rear was secure, only for it to be set upon by the enemy's strongest troops. In the heat of battle, she could never be sure if she was making a correct or wrong decision. Valliere thought it sounded so different from Polly's story about his first battle. When she asked him about it, he revealed that he was so nervous and truly thought he was going to die. The chief of the village they were staying at seemed suspicious and after interrogating her, it came to light that the whole village was in league with the bandits. Helga continued, saying that after that, Polly slew 20 of the bandits alone. Valliere thought it sounded like a heroic epic, but unlike Valliere, her sister truly did come back from that great war. Anastasia continued, emphasizing that Valliere had to come to terms with the fact that the people they love could die at any time. Anastasia herself had lost a number of very talented subordinates. But if they talked about Valliere, those she cared about were cut down before her eyes. Would she be able to keep herself composed? And when that time came, instead of despairing over what she could have done, she needed to remember to focus on what she could do next. Valliere thought that Anastasia's experience was more valuable than gold. Anastasia continued, stating that it should mentally prepare Valliere for her first battle. Valliere asked if that was all. Anastasia replied that it was already time for her to leave, so she should hurry up and get going. Valliere agreed and thought that Anastasia's eyes were just as intimidating as ever that day. She then exited, and all her guards became excited. Polly asked if she had completed her preparations. Valliere nodded. He said that if that's the case, then let's set off. And they departed from the castle, heading towards the market. After they reached a distance, Polly shouted at Sabine, criticizing her sluggishness and questioning her energy levels. Sabine responded, attributing her sluggishness to the weight of their surroundings. Valliere wondered if they had all indulged a bit too much the previous night. As they proceeded, a woman remarked to another that Polly and his troops were all wearing chainmail, yet no one seemed to be complaining. Valliere pondered what they would have left if they drained themselves of all their energy, then exclaimed that Sabine had brought it upon herself. Polly explained that it was Sabine's first battle, something she would grow accustomed to after a few campaigns. Sabine argued that they were only facing a dozen or so bandits. Was it really necessary to take a break so soon? Polly acknowledged that it wasn't ideal, but emphasized the importance of ensuring everyone was in good condition given the uncertainties of the battlefield. Eventually, they decided to take a short rest. While resting, Valliere noticed a line of ants, considering the elimination of a small number of bandits to be an easy task. However, she feared that failure would result in the loss of Polly and the disbandment of her royal guard, leaving her as nothing but a spare, with low expectations from anyone, and her family, the nobles, even the common people, had no hope in her whatsoever. But as long as they all made it through safely, that was good enough for her, and she would do her best for those guard girls. She exclaimed that they were all being careless, questioning what would happen if the bandits ambushed them while they were fooling around. The noise they made rustled, prompting her to wonder what it was. Valliere mentioned that she needed to use the toilet. Sabine remarked that Valliere screamed so loudly whenever she got scared. Another person noted that Valliere had never left the capital before. Valliere thought that it would be beneficial if she could stop getting frightened so easily. While travelling, one person mentioned that they didn't know, but they had heard that the Willendorf cocks were a sight to behold. Others expressed their excitement upon hearing this. The women teased Sabine, telling her it would be good for her. Polly remarked that it was impressive to see them so lively, considering they were only 3 days old, and they even moved well. Helga joked that if Polly asked her, it seemed more like shared nerves. Valliere scolded Sabine, telling her to stop singing such vulgar songs. Sabine apologized, explaining that singing songs while marching was a tradition granted to common soldiers since ancient times. Valliere reminded Sabine that she wasn't a common soldier, but a knight, so she shouldn't sing in front of Polly. She mentioned the soldiers from the Polidoro domain, who beat up anyone they thought was harassing them, showing no mercy. Valliere suggested it was probably too late for Sabine. She then apologized to Polly and asked if he was all right. Polly reassured her not to worry about him. He was just at a loss for words at the sheer deplorability. Valliere apologized again. Sabine realized she had completely forgotten they had a gentleman marching with them, and then she asked Polly if they could sing a heroic ballad instead. Polly told Helga to shelve that idea as they were almost there. Helga agreed to take a look around and instructed the others to lower their guard and stay alert. They all crouched down, and Valliere realized it was their first time seeing real crossbows. Polly informed her that with one of those, a common soldier could shoot a knight dead. Helga surveyed the area, and Polly asked if she saw anything. She became worried upon seeing a burning village, and reported that it appeared to have been completely pillaged, with bodies scattered around. Polly commented that things seemed to have gotten a lot more complicated. As they approached, they were shocked to find numerous corpses hanging from trees and strewn about the ground. A young girl, injured and unable to walk properly, approached them. They sought refuge in a nearby house, with all 15 guards standing guard. Valliere was stunned to learn that there were over 100 bandits. Polly questioned the girl, stating that the village had indeed been attacked, with many dead and valuables stolen. He expressed doubt about her role as the head woman of the village and questioned whether she had fulfilled her duties. She asked who he might be. Polly introduced himself and explained that he was the advisor to the second princess. He then asked the girl why she wasn't among the corpses. She hesitantly admitted that during the attack she was hit in the arm by a crossbow bolt and passed out when she fell from her saddle. Valliere inquired about any discrepancies in the reports and requested more details from the girl, asking why a village full of 100 women couldn't hold out for at least a few days. The girl explained that initially there were only 30 bandits, but their numbers slowly increased. She didn't like where things were heading, especially after a succession struggle erupted within the ruling family of a nearby town with over 1,000 people. This struggle escalated into a bloody feud, culminating in a battle between their forces. Eventually, the first daughter emerged victorious, but hesitated when it came to ordering the execution of her rebellious sister. Valliere interjected, questioning whether the girl meant that the attack on the village was led by the second daughter of the Bosel family. The girl continued, revealing that the second daughter of the Bosel family seized the opportunity to flee in disgrace as an outlaw, taking her soldiers and all their arms and armor with her. Valliere was saddened to hear this, and asked if they were just dealing with a gang of bandits. Polly then asked the girl how she became so well informed. She replied that a messenger had arrived from the first daughter, warning them about the second daughter and advising them to leave the area. Polly became angry, stating that the second daughter was an incompetent leader who couldn't even handle her own affairs. The girl mentioned that they also dispatched someone to inform the capital, but by the time she arrived, he must have already left. Valliere remarked that the capital must have been in complete uproar by that time. The girl explained that they had decided to resist, so they had all the men and boys take shelter at her residence. However, even after gathering all the villagers, they didn't get a chance. Getting emotional, she apologized for not fulfilling her duty. Valliere hugged her and reassured her that she had done well, expressing regret for bringing up those memories again. She then called Polly and asked what they should do next. He replied that first they had to predict the next move of the enemies. If she asked him, he couldn't see her waiting around long after brazenly attacking a village that pays taxes directly to the capital. Considering that the border of Willendorf was so close, the next move of the enemies was likely to attempt an escape across it to seek asylum with them. They also had to consider that they were up against a force of at least 100, or perhaps even more. Valliere wondered seriously if they could expect reinforcements. Polly replied that Astarte was in the capital, alongside the 200 members of her personal standing army. After learning about the situation, she would come, but it wouldn't be immediate. Even if she already knew about it, she would take the least time possible, which was 2 days, to march there. They only had 15 guards, his 20 troops, and themselves. So, pursuing 100 with 37 people was truly impossible. Valliere thought she would fail in her first battle. Polly didn't know about the size of Anastasia's forces, but Mother made it clear to Valliere that failure there was not an option. She just pondered what would change if she failed and whether she could sacrifice the lives of the loyal guards who followed her there. As she was lost in thought, Sabine reassured her not to worry and reminded her that they could at least buy some time. All 15 of them were prepared for the outcome, and if they could make a good showing there, they would be treated like heroes back in the capital. They were so popular with the boys that they would be gushing waterfalls for weeks. Valliere, acknowledging her status as the second princess, felt the weight of her blue blood and ordered them to give chase. Valliere then asked Polly to clearly tell her what he would have her do. He replied that considering Valliere's first battle ended in failure, she should order the pursuit to be abandoned. Valliere realized it had gone too far, and she couldn't bear the idea of those girls dying for her sake. Reluctantly, she agreed to abandon the pursuit. Valliere left the house of the head woman like a frightened mouse, making her final exit from the stage. Then all the guards came around her. One remarked how fired up they were, suggesting that if they told her there were bandits, she might believe them. Hannah urged her to think before saying anything. Valliere felt so overwhelmed with Hannah asking what they should do about it all. It seemed like a multitude of people were seeking her help, joining their hands in front of her. She felt powerless, realizing there wasn't much she could do for them, especially since she wasn't her sister. Helga suggested they should go, and Valliere agreed. Polly assured them to leave it to them, but Valliere replied not to rely on her. The head woman halted them all. The guards asked what she was talking about, and if the nobles would help them, pressing for clarification. The head woman shouted that there was nothing they could do, so they should just stop. Helga then said to Sabine and Valliere that they were retreating. Valliere was shocked and asked for the reason behind the sudden decision to retreat. She questioned what all this talk of retreat was about. Sabine explained that it seemed they had failed in their first battle. Valliere and Helga asked if they were done for if they returned like that. Sabine clarified that she was trying to think of a way out. They questioned if Sabine was truly cut out for this and what Polly had been saying. They dropped to their knees, pleading with Sabine to save her brother. A lady begged Valliere to intervene. Valliere thought to herself that she needed to stop this. Just then, Sabine arrived and asked Valliere if everything was fine. Valliere replied that it was, but Sabine shouted at the guards to leave and not to dare to grab Valliere like that. Valliere suddenly realized something and asked Sabine to wait, questioning how she could act in such a manner. Sabine angrily retorted that the knight had hit Valliere and dared her to do something about it. Then, she struck Valliere again, behaving erratically. She ranted about how they were treated like brutes and how they had sacrificed so much for a bunch of corpses. She vowed to beat them up, accusing them of only being able to prattle while giving up everything in their lives. She declared them useless. All the others wondered what was happening with Sabine. She continued shouting that their head woman was covered in wounds, questioning why they were all alive without a scratch while the dead woman lay alone. A man explained that the woman had fought bravely to the last, trying to stop them from taking her son. Anyone who attempted to intervene to protect their husbands and brothers was hanged as an example. Sabine yelled that it was unjust, questioning why they were all strung up like that. She blamed them all for fleeing and yet still trying to cling to Valliere. She threatened to kill each and every one of them if they dared to bother her again. Valliere asked Polly to stop Zabine, stating that she was acting irrationally and didn't know what she was doing. She pleaded for Polly to intervene before Zabine hurt herself. However, Polly remained silent. Zabine continued to shout, questioning what they were all doing until they reached that point. She accused them of not only failing to pursue but also neglecting to bury their heroes. When they finally arrived, many of them were still hiding somewhere. She questioned why, as knights, they hadn't come to help them. Valliere pleaded with Polly to halt Zabine's incessant shouting. Zabine persisted, insisting that whether they begged for it or not, the issue was irrelevant since Valliere had arrived. However, they acknowledged their inability to handle the situation alone and expressed a longing for heroes among them who could bolster their ranks. Some murmured that Zabine lacked weapons and strength, yet she bravely wielded a pitchfork in defiance, wishing for heroes akin to her mother. Despite their efforts, they couldn't rescue anyone and were resigned to finding a ditch to perish in. A lady, identifying herself as one of the knights present, admonished Zabine not to fool around. Zabine retorted that they were tired of hearing the same reprimands and advised the lady to direct her words to someone who cared. Zabine questioned how anyone could comprehend her emotions, feeling as though they were being mocked and ignored. Hannah assured Zabine that even if they were alone, they would stand by her. Zabine remarked that it appeared they had found a hero and requested that the matter be dropped, stating their intention to join as well. The others concurred. Zabine applauded their bravery, remarking that there seemed to be no shortage of heroes among them. Encouraging them to seize the moment and take up arms, she declared it was time to lay down their lives and unite to dismantle the arrogant noble. Their emotions ignited. They all became enraged. Valliere pondered the situation, considering the large militia they had with them. Despite being inexperienced, he questioned whether they should reconsider Zabine's suggestion to retreat. Polly affirmed Zabine's formidable nature, noting how she had transformed mere villagers into soon-to-be adversaries. He criticized the guards serving under the second princess, suggesting they knew nothing of a knight's honor. Polly questioned whether Zabine had crossed the line intentionally or had simply forgotten her duty as a noble. Zabine countered, stating that they were all doomed if they abandoned them like that, emphasizing that she would have given up if they truly stood no chance. However, with their presence, the situation was different, right, Polly? Polly responded that Zabine was greatly overestimating him, emphasizing that he wasn't like Astarte and couldn't single-handedly turn the tide of battle. Zabine countered, stating that bringing additional troops was a simple solution if he asked her. Polly sighed, expressing frustration at having to revisit the topic, noting the numerous challenges they still faced. Furta urgently wanted to intercept Caroline before she crossed the border into Willendorf, necessitating their travel to the border within a mere 3 days. Even if they managed that, there remained the daunting possibility of facing over 40 knights, with Caroline and her company likely putting up fierce resistance. Despite bolstering their numbers, Polly couldn't guarantee everyone's safe return. Some suggested abandoning the plan altogether. Hannah insisted that ensuring Valliere's survival was paramount if they proceeded. Another member stressed that this was their one opportunity for glory, and winning would feel immensely satisfying. Someone urged Polly not to tempt fate with negative remarks. Polly acknowledged the second problem, the lack of sufficient commanders for their forces. One person questioned whether Polly planned to lead the 40 militia members. Zabine inquired if she herself wasn't enough to lead them. The headwoman of the village pleaded with Polly to give her a chance to redeem herself, asserting that despite her age, she still possessed the strength to wield a sword and contribute to defeating Caroline. Polly sought reassurance, asking if she was certain about her abilities. Grateful for the opportunity, she thanked him. Sabine assured Polly that there would be no issue, insisting she could handle it. Polly remarked that those girls had been quite insistent. Valliere intervened, advising Polly not to judge the situation rashly, emphasizing that Sabine wasn't playing games and they were returning home without anyone getting hurt. Other girls approached Sabine, questioning if she had abandoned them. Valliere empathetically expressed understanding for their frustration. They inquired what they were supposed to do with the anger they felt. Valliere assured them that their story would be heard, promising that upon their return to the capital, they would dispatch someone to address their grievances. A girl told Valliere that they were all prepared to die for her. Valliere was taken aback by this declaration and suddenly raised her voice, admonishing them to stop spouting such nonsense. She questioned who had asked them to die for her, insisting they revert to being a source of pain for her. Recognizing their inability to act, she implored them to stop pretending to be heroes. She knew deep down they were all scared, so why were they saying such things? Valliere began to cry, expressing a desire to return to the capital and wishing she could turn back time. Sabine confessed that she too was afraid to die. She reminisced about spending carefree evenings with her friends, affectionately referred to as the monkeys by Valliere, drinking and laughing away their troubles. Despite her penchant for avoiding difficult situations, even she could sense the seriousness in Valliere's expression. Sabine acknowledged that if they were to flee at such a critical moment, would she still be their leader, and would they remain by her side? If they chose to cling to life, she would gladly abandon the villagers and return home with them. However, she couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible would happen if they did. All the knights were at her side, so just give them orders to pursue them all. Then all the girls gathered together and said that they didn't have any other place to belong, which was the same as being dead, so just give them her orders. Valliere replied that she hadn't heard the final statement of Polly, and then she asked him if he had any other issues. Polly retorted that the score didn't exactly motivate her. Instead, he would like to request an extra reward from the royal coffers, and he would like the princess to guarantee he was getting a big slice of that pie. Sabine asked what was wrong with him, and wasn't he a knight as well? Don't underestimate how small Valliere's budget was. Polly replied that they were flat broke as well, and Valliere's thinking wasn't wrong, at least for the time being. Just then, Valliere stopped and said that it was settled. She would personally demand compensation for that incident from Helma, the new ruler of the Video Lands. Then she shall duly reward Polly using that money, and she won't accept a pittance. She will get everything she could out of her. Polly replied that it wasn't bad at all. She responded that he helped her remember. Polly contended that there was nothing he hated more than an incompetent leader. So let's finish that, and then they could go and squeeze that moron for every last penny she owes them. Valliere trembled to hear that. Sabine said that now she would start sorting out which of them could come with them to test Caroline with her finger. Helga called Polly. Polly asked, "What's that?" And Valliere had already given the order to go ahead, so it was a bit late to raise objections. Helga replied that it wasn't like that. She was in wonder of a lady as his wife. Shocked, Polly asked if Helga was being the wife hunter for him in such a situation. And she was so amazing. Helga then pointed at a girl to see. Polly asked which girl. Then he saw Helga was pointing at Sabine. Sabine told every soldier that they had to know her marching songs. So just repeat after her, and she asked the headwomen of the village to sing as well. Helga told Polly that Sabine would be the highest recommendation from her. Polly was shocked to hear and asked if Helga had any other recommendations, and suggested that she was just kidding. She replied that Zabine only lacked manners. Polly retorted that Zabine may be noble, but she was told common folk ought to die and even forced a young princess into a life-or-death situation, casting aside her obligations as a noble for purely selfish reasons. He questioned what Helga would think of him if he demanded that she and the others die, as there wasn't much difference. Helga asked if they would probably die for him, and rather, weren't those villagers really too gutless? She didn't think that Zabine did anything wrong, especially considering Valliere was already 14 years old. They were all quite agreeable, and Helga had grown fond of them. She thought she would forget how different the culture was between the war-torn frontiers of the Polidoro land and that of the land near the capital, where Zabine had lived so close to war all her life, and savagery just seemed normal to her. Polly admitted that sadly he was a bit stupid as well, so he couldn't explain what he meant very well, but they would be seeing a lot more deaths from there, to which she agreed with him. The scene shifts to the capital, where Lisa was sitting with Astarte. Lisa asked her if the preparation for the campaign had not been completed yet. Astarte, feeling sleepy, so Lisa called her in a loud voice. Astarte yawned, stating that it takes preparation to mobilize 200 men, and they would be out there the next day. Lisa was surprised to hear this. Astarte explained that even though they had a standing army, in the current situation, they might not be able to respond immediately. She asked if Lise knew or not, but she had already roused the merchants and labourers, and the provisions and wagons would be gathered up soon enough. There was nothing they could do to stop them, and yet, despite that, their queen was in such a state. Wasn't the marching route unfavourable? And if they took a wrong turn, they might cross the border and cause the war to break out for the second time in Willendorf. So, making the path to leave even more distant, the ex-knight of theirs had gone and caused unnecessary troubles again, which was absurd. Lisa asked about getting ahead of the borderline. Astarte replied that she already discussed that with Anastasia, and they made a plan. She reminded Lisa of the time when they should consult the genius for that, so discussing it with Anastasia would be helpful. As she explained everything to Anastasia, Anastasia mentioned the plan, saying it was likely they wouldn't make it in time. If Caroline were delayed, for example, if a wagon broke down, there was a chance they might raid other territories in their desire for gifts. However, there was also a possibility they could make it in time, and there was no way to avoid sending reinforcements. Polly might be holding them in place and wouldn't budge even with moderate pressure, leading Anastasia to feel they were in retreat. Astarte stopped her reminiscing, and Lisa mentioned that something was amiss with Valliere. Astarte replied that the fool insisted on a reckless pursuit, so let them do it. It was Lise who had the second daughter positioned as a figurehead, keeping her at a distance. Wasn't that sudden show of motherly concern a bit much? She didn't take her as a figurehead because she saw her as expendable, and currently she was just crying in the dilapidated direct territories, and then she asked Lisa why she was in such a hurry. Astarte told Valliere that if she missed the mark, they would take Polly from her. Lisa asked Astarte the reason for her smirking, as Valliere might very well be in distress and tears currently. Astarte said it was nothing, just those lady guards were there, that's all, and if they pursued them, that would become a serious situation. Lisa asked Astarte not to say such dreadful things. Astarte stated that it was Lisa who saddled them with the table. Lisa replied that she thought she had selected the second and third daughters from respectable military houses. Yet they turned out to be nothing but wretched dregs, and that was a terrible treatment she had inflicted on her daughter. The reputation of the royal family was at stake there. Astarte said that if they underestimated them, just kill them. Lise mentioned that there was one more thing. She was leaving Valliere in the care of Astarte. Astarte replied that Lisa told Anastasia the same thing. Saying this, Astarte left the room and wondered if she was really loved. It was unclear whether she was truly loved at all. She felt happy, and their knights disliked her, but she was of mediocre talent. Placing Valliere in the second princess' personal guard, commoners were fine, but blue blood mediocrity was unforgivable. Incompetent nobility was a great sin, merely by virtue of their continued existence. The scene shifts to the Caroline party, where all the people were being led away, repeating seeking asylum in Willendorf several times. Everyone appeared exhausted, and then one person urged them to keep moving forward. A lady remarked that they were all like fugitives, and another added that if they were caught, they would surely be hanged. Others continued to lament the earlier world. Walking with the help of a stick, a girl stumbled and fell to sit down. As she tried to relax, a lady asked her what was wrong and why she was sitting. When the girl raised her head to see who asked her, she realized it was Caroline, dressed in knight's attire and riding a horse. Caroline told the girl that if she was her loyal retainer, she shouldn't advance, as the people wouldn't follow either. The girl replied that there was no energy in her legs and she would follow by crawling, so she asked Caroline to go ahead. Caroline refused, saying that if the girl did that on the muddy road, she would catch a cold. Even the noble buttons on her seemed tired. Caroline then dismounted the horse to lift the girl, who tried to deny it because they shouldn't fall behind for her sake. Caroline replied that being alone in the night wilderness was dangerous, as they knew. As she lifted the girl commented that she felt so ashamed. Caroline told her not to think of that. After some time, they all took a rest. One person said to Caroline that it was their lack of strength that had caused her such hardship. Caroline firmly stated that it was entirely her own lack of ability, and she had failed. She then reassured them not to worry, and if she were to give up there, people would laugh at her. She thought she had failed in everything. A girl agreed with her and said that she couldn't die until she brought back good news for everyone.